There are moments in life that cannot be explained by chance. Encounters, events, words that would have meant nothing at another time. Yet in the right moment change everything. Carl Jung was convinced that life is not chaotic. That behind what we call coincidence, there is a deeper order at work. An order that does not think linearly, does not explain logically, but connects through meaning. For Jung, causality was not limited to a simple chain of cause and effect. He saw another layer of reality, a layer in which events are linked not by external causes, but by inner significance. He called this principle synchronicity. Synchronicity means that two or more events occur at the same time, and are meaningfully related, even though one does not cause the other. Not cause, not randomness, but meaning. A thought arises within you, and at the same moment something appears in the outer world that mirrors that thought, not because you created it, not because you controlled it, but because your inner state and external reality briefly enter resonance. Jung believed that when this happens, the unconscious is speaking, and it speaks not in logic, but in symbols. Jung believed that when synchronicity occurs, the unconscious is not merely reacting, it is revealing. It reveals that the inner world and the outer world are not as separate as we are taught to believe, that psyche and matter, mind and reality, move together in ways that cannot always be measured, but can be deeply felt. Modern thinking insists that only what can be proven is real. That meaning must come after explanation. But Jung reversed this idea. For him, meaning often comes first. Explanation follows later, if at all. This is why synchronistic events feel numinous. They carry a sense of awe, as if something larger than the ego briefly steps into awareness. A symbol appears in a dream, and the same symbol emerges in waking life. A question lives quietly in your mind, and an unexpected encounter answers it, not with clarity, but with direction. These moments are not meant to be decoded immediately. They are meant to be lived. Jung warned that reducing synchronicity to superstition misses its psychological function. Its purpose is not prediction, but orientation. It helps the individual understand where they are in their inner development. When life presents a meaningful coincidence, it is often at a turning point, a moment of crisis, a transition, a psychological crossroads. At such moments, the rational mind alone is insufficient. Logic cannot guide what has not yet taken form. And so the psyche speaks symbolically, through dreams, through encounters, through events that feel charged with meaning. Jung believed that the unconscious seeks balance. When consciousness becomes too one-sided, too rigid, too disconnected from inner truth, synchronistic events compensate. They restore equilibrium. This is why these experiences often disrupt certainty. They challenge what you thought you knew. They shake assumptions. They invite reflection rather than control. And this is also why they cannot be forced. You cannot manufacture synchronicity. The moment you try to chase it, it loses its meaning. Because synchronicity is not about desire. It is about readiness. It appears when the psyche is open enough to receive what it does not yet understand. Jung often observed that people who experienced synchronicities were undergoing profound inner change. Their old structures were dissolving. New ones had not yet formed. In that space of uncertainty, meaning breaks through, not as certainty, but as guidance. And guidance does not tell you what to do. It shows you where to look. This is why synchronicity is deeply personal. The same event can be meaningless to one person, and life-altering to another. Meaning is not in the event itself. It arises in the relationship between the event and the individual. Jung called this the acausal connecting principle, a connection not governed by cause and effect, but by significance. This idea challenges the modern obsession with control. If not everything is caused, then not everything can be managed. And this realization can be unsettling, but it can also be liberating. It suggests that life is not merely something that happens to us, but something that responds to us, not to our will, but to our inner state. When you are aligned with your deeper self, life speaks differently. Opportunities appear. Encounters carry weight. Events seem to arrive at the exact moment they are needed, not because the universe is conspiring, but because the psyche is participating. Jung never claimed that synchronicity replaces reason. He insisted that it complements it. Reason explains how things work. Synchronicity reveals why they matter. Without reason, we fall into chaos. Without meaning, we fall into emptiness. A mature psyche needs both. This is why Jung believed that denying the symbolic dimension of life leads to neurosis. When meaning is ignored, it returns in distorted forms. Anxiety, depression, a sense of aimlessness. The psyche demands to be heard, and when it is not, life finds other ways to speak, often through coincidence. Not random coincidence, but meaningful coincidence. Events that catch your attention, that interrupt routine, that ask you to pause. Not everything that happens is synchronistic, but when something is, there is a subtle inner response, a feeling of being addressed, of being included in something larger. And this feeling cannot be argued away. It does not require belief. It requires awareness. Jung emphasized that the danger lies not in experiencing synchronicity, but in misunderstanding it. When meaning is taken literally, when symbols are confused with commands, the ego begins to inflate, and inflation separates the individual from reality. For Jung, synchronicity was never about control or prediction. It was about dialogue, a dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious, between the individual and the larger patterns of life. To remain grounded, one must hold meaning lightly, not cling to it, not demand certainty from it. Because symbols point, they do not dictate. This is why Jung insisted on psychological responsibility. A meaningful coincidence does not absolve you from choice. It deepens it. You are still responsible for your actions, still responsible for interpretation, still responsible for integration. Synchronicity does not replace effort. It accompanies it. And when it is integrated properly, it leads to humility rather than grandiosity. The individual realizes that they are part of a larger order, but not its center. This understanding softens the ego. It creates space for listening. Listening becomes more important than explanation. You begin to notice patterns rather than isolated events, themes rather than outcomes, movements rather than results. Life starts to feel less like a series of accidents, and more like a conversation unfolding over time. Not a conversation you fully understand, but one you gradually learn to participate in. Jung observed that synchronicity often appears when a person has exhausted rational solutions, when logic reaches its limit, when willpower no longer works. At this edge, something else takes over. Not chaos, but orientation without certainty. And this is deeply uncomfortable for the modern mind. We are trained to demand clarity before action, to seek guarantees before trust. But psychological growth rarely offers such comfort. Growth requires entering the unknown, with awareness rather than control. This is why Jung believed that true meaning cannot be manufactured. It must be encountered, and encounters happen when attention is present. Many people miss synchronistic moments because they are rushing, distracted, disconnected from their inner life. The psyche whispers before it shouts. Dreams lose their impact when waking life is too loud. And yet, when someone begins to slow down, to reflect, to listen inwardly, life responds. Not dramatically, but subtly. A book appears at the right moment. A conversation touches something essential. A question meets an unexpected response. These are not miracles. They are moments of alignment. Alignment between inner readiness and outer circumstance. Jung never separated psychology from spirituality, but he also never confused them. For him, spirituality was psychological experience, taken seriously, not belief, not dogma, but lived meaning. Synchronicity belongs to this realm. It does not ask to be believed in. It asks to be reflected upon. And reflection takes time. Meaning does not arrive fully formed. It unfolds, often long after the event itself. Years later, something clicks. A past coincidence reveals its significance. A moment that once seemed strange now feels inevitable, not because fate was fixed, but because understanding has matured. The psyche moves in circles, not straight lines. It revisits themes from different levels of awareness. And with each return, depth increases. This is why Jung said that we do not solve life's problems. We outgrow them. And synchronicity often marks these moments of outgrowing. A threshold, a transition, a quiet signal that an old way of being is no longer sufficient. Not an ending. Not yet. Just a shift in direction. Jung often spoke of the psyche as a living system, one that compensates, balances, and corrects itself over time. Synchronicity, in this sense, is not an interruption of natural order, but an expression of it. What appears extraordinary is often the psyche restoring equilibrium between inner attitude and outer life. When consciousness becomes rigid, when it clings too tightly to familiar explanations, life introduces ambiguity, not to confuse, but to soften certainty. Ambiguity invites reflection. It slows interpretation. It creates space for deeper awareness. This is why synchronistic events resist immediate explanation. They linger. They echo. They ask to be carried, not solved. Jung observed that individuals who live only in analysis often miss the experiential dimension of meaning. They dissect symbols until nothing is left but fragments. But meaning does not live in fragments. It lives in relationship. The relationship between image and emotion, between event and inner state, between moment and memory. Synchronicity exists in this relational field. It is not something that happens to you. It happens with you. And this distinction matters, because when something happens with you, you are involved, not as a controller, but as a participant. Participation requires awareness. Awareness requires presence. And presence changes how life unfolds. When attention deepens, patterns begin to surface. Not patterns imposed by belief, but patterns recognized through experience. Certain themes repeat. Certain symbols return. Certain questions reappear in different forms. Jung called these motifs archetypal. They are not personal inventions. They belong to the collective unconscious. And when they activate in an individual life, they bring a sense of inevitability. Not fatalism, but significance. You may feel that something is unfolding, without fully knowing what it is. A sense of direction without a map. Movement without clear destination. This state can feel unsettling. The ego prefers defined goals, clear narratives, beginnings and endings. But the psyche moves differently. It moves through images, emotions, and evolving meanings. Synchronicity often appears when the ego loosens its grip. Not when it surrenders, but when it listens. Listening is an act of humility. It acknowledges that not everything meaningful can be planned, that some insights arrive sideways, unexpectedly, and yet they arrive precisely when they can be received. Jung warned that ignoring these moments leads to inner fragmentation. When meaning knocks and is dismissed, the psyche reacts, sometimes through symptoms, sometimes through restlessness, sometimes through a vague sense of disconnection. Life feels busy, but empty, active, but directionless. Synchronicity offers orientation, not answers. It does not tell you what to believe. It invites you to notice, to pause, to reflect on what is emerging. And emergence is subtle. It does not announce itself loudly. It unfolds quietly, through repetition, through resonance, through a growing sense that something within is shifting. This shift is not dramatic. It is cumulative. Small moments gather meaning over time. A chance meeting, a recurring symbol, a persistent question. None of these stand alone. Together, they form a pattern. And patterns reveal process. Process is central to Jung's psychology. He did not focus on outcomes, but on movement, on becoming. Synchronicity, then, is not about destiny fixed in advance, but about orientation within becoming, a way the psyche communicates direction, without forcing conclusion. And as long as the individual remains attentive, the conversation continues. Jung understood that becoming conscious is not a linear ascent, but a series of descents and returns. Moments of clarity followed by uncertainty, insight followed by doubt. Synchronicity often appears in these in-between spaces, when the old understanding has loosened, and the new one has not yet taken shape. In these moments, the psyche is especially receptive, less defended, less certain of itself. And it is precisely then that meaning can enter, not as doctrine, but as experience, an experience that does not demand interpretation right away. Jung cautioned against the urge to explain too quickly. Explanation can become a defense, a way to avoid being affected. But to be affected is essential, because what does not affect us does not transform us. Synchronicity affects not by force, but by relevance. It touches something already alive within the psyche. That is why two people can witness the same event, and only one experiences it as meaningful. Meaning is not distributed equally. It emerges where readiness exists, and readiness is shaped by life experience, by suffering, by reflection, by inner work. This is why periods of difficulty often precede synchronistic experiences, not because hardship is rewarded, but because struggle deepens awareness. When someone is forced to question who they are, what they value, and where they are going, the psyche opens, and in that openness, connections appear. Connections that feel timely, charged, precise, not comforting, but orienting. Jung did not believe that the unconscious speaks to reassure us. It speaks to correct imbalance. If consciousness becomes too identified with control, life introduces unpredictability. If consciousness becomes too narrow, life introduces contradiction. If consciousness becomes too rigid, life introduces symbol. Symbol does not argue. It invites contemplation. And contemplation slows the psyche down. In a world obsessed with speed, slowness becomes revolutionary. Slowness allows resonance to be felt, allows patterns to be noticed, allows meaning to mature. Synchronicity requires this slowness. Without it, events remain flat, detached from inner life. With it, even ordinary moments begin to carry depth. A sentence overheard, a name repeated, an image that refuses to fade. None of these insist on interpretation. They linger. And lingering is how the psyche works. It circles, returns, deepens. This circular movement is often misunderstood as indecision or stagnation. But for Jung, it was essential. Growth does not move straight forward. It spirals. And synchronistic events often mark points on that spiral. Not endpoints, but shifts in perspective. What once seemed accidental begins to feel connected. What once felt isolated reveals context. This does not mean everything becomes meaningful. It means awareness becomes selective. The psyche learns what to attend to, and attention changes experience. What you attend to grows in significance. What you ignore fades. Synchronicity sharpens attention, not by force, but by intrigue. Something catches you, and you do not know why. You return to it mentally, emotionally, symbolically, and in returning, Something in you reorganizes. Not dramatically, quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day, you notice that your orientation has shifted. You respond differently. You value differently. You choose differently. Not because you decided to change, but because meaning has worked its way in. And this process does not announce completion. It continues, layer by layer, experience by experience. As long as consciousness remains willing to listen, the dialogue remains open, and the psyche continues to speak, in the language it knows best, through connection, through symbol, through moments that resist being reduced to chance alone. And so, what Carl Jung ultimately invites us to consider is not whether coincidences exist, but whether we are willing to listen when meaning reveals itself. Because life does not always speak loudly. It rarely offers certainty. Instead, it offers moments. Moments that disturb routine. Moments that interrupt certainty. Moments that quietly ask us to look inward rather than outward. Synchronistic experiences are not proofs. They are invitations. Invitations to participate consciously in our own lives. To recognize that we are not merely observers of events, but participants in a dialogue between inner and outer reality. Jung never claimed that everything happens for a reason that can be fully understood. He understood something more subtle. That meaning is not imposed on life. It emerges through relationship, through attention, through reflection, through the courage to stay present with what cannot yet be explained. When we dismiss these moments as mere chance, we lose an opportunity for depth. When we cling to them as destiny, we lose humility. But when we hold them with awareness, they become guides rather than answers. They orient us without controlling us. They deepen us without enclosing us. And perhaps this is the true causality Jung spoke of. Not a chain of events pushing us forward, but a field of meaning pulling us inward. A causality that does not force conclusions, but invites consciousness. If this exploration resonated with you, if you felt something stir beneath the surface, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here, we take time to reflect. We explore depth psychology, meaning, and the inner life. Not to reach quick answers, but to cultivate awareness. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying present. And remember, what truly matters in life is rarely accidental.